The Korvathi Dominion had conquered 14 star systems, mastered faster-than-light travel, and engineered biological weapons capable of sterilizing entire planets. Yet somehow, their finest military officers could not catch a single animal on a backwater forest moon without setting themselves on fire. This was the state of galactic affairs in the year 2847, and nobody found it particularly surprising anymore. Commander Vexthor of the Korvathi Imperial Guard stood at the edge of the clearing on Verdant 9, his 4 arms adjusting the 17 different dials on his quantum displacement rifle. The weapon could theoretically vaporize a target from 3 kilometers away, calculate wind resistance down to the molecular level, and brew a decent cup of coffee. It had cost more than a small spacecraft. Vexthor's exoskeleton gleamed in the morning light, enhanced musculature rippling beneath crystalline armor plates that could deflect plasma rounds. He looked like he was preparing to invade a small country, not hunt for dinner. Beside him, Lieutenant Krelnuk of the Zenthari Collective checked her holographic tactical display for the 47th time in 10 minutes. The Zenthari were a silicon-based species who saw in 17 different spectrums and could detect heartbeats from half a kilometer away. Krelnuk's sensor array extended from her dorsal ridge like a crown of gleaming antennae, each one calibrated to track different biological signatures. She had loaded 342 hunting protocols into her neural interface before breakfast. The interface itself was worth approximately the gross domestic product of a developing colony world. The third member of their party, Flight Officer Drentok of the Quelani Tribes, simply carried enough weaponry to arm a small battalion. The Quelani believed in overwhelming firepower as a solution to all problems, including grocery shopping. Drentok's scale-covered bulk bristled with energy weapons, net launchers, stasis grenades, and something that looked suspiciously like a portable artillery piece. His species had eliminated all large predators on their homeworld within 3 generations of discovering gunpowder. Subtlety was not in their vocabulary, possibly because their language consisted entirely of aggressive clicking sounds. These 3 representatives of galactic military might had come to Verdant 9 for a simple reason: bragging rights. The Korvathi Zenthari Quelani Alliance held joint training exercises every solar cycle, and this year's event included a mandatory survival assessment. Command had decided their officers were growing too dependent on technology and needed to reconnect with their predatory roots. Some genius at headquarters had called it team building. The officers called it bureaucratic nonsense, but orders were orders. The planet itself was unremarkable by galactic standards. Oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere, carbon-based ecosystem, 1 major continent covered in temperate forest. No sentient species, no valuable minerals, no strategic importance whatsoever. It existed on star charts purely because some exploration vessel had bothered to scan it 2 centuries ago before moving on to more interesting systems. The Galactic Cooperation Commission maintained a small research outpost on the southern continent, staffed by the kind of scientists who preferred plants to people and considered fungal spores fascinating dinner conversation. What the 3 officers did not know was that the Commission had recently hired a human to run wilderness survival courses for their researchers. Budget constraints meant they could not afford proper training facilities, so they had simply imported someone from Earth who claimed to know about forests. The human had arrived 6 months ago, built a cabin with hand tools, and promptly disappeared into the woods for weeks at a time. The scientists considered this perfectly normal human behavior and stopped worrying about it. Vexthor raised his primary manipulator claw, signaling for attention. His translator rendered his clicking speech into flat, emotionless galactic standard. "We shall demonstrate the superiority of Korvathi hunting techniques. I will track the largest predator on this continent and return with its head before the sun reaches its zenith." Krelnuk's mandibles clicked in what her species considered laughter. "Your theatrics are noted, Commander. While you crash through the undergrowth like a drunken cargo hauler, I will use actual strategy and return with multiple specimens. Quality over quantity is a primitive concept." Drentok simply checked the charge on his plasma rifle and grunted something that the translator struggled to interpret. "Settling on Drentok brings much meat or much fire. Both good." They had agreed to reconvene at sunset with their kills. The officer who returned with the most impressive game would win eternal glory, and more importantly, would not have to write the after-action report. It was the kind of low-stakes competition that military personnel took far too seriously. What none of them noticed was the figure watching from the tree line, leaning against a trunk with the relaxed posture of someone enjoying free entertainment. Marcus Webb had been observing the alien trio for about 20 minutes, and he had already concluded this was going to be hilarious. He recognized military posturing when he saw it, having spent 8 years in the Marines before discovering he preferred trees to officers. The aliens had more technology strapped to them than a small spaceship, and they moved through the forest with all the grace of falling cargo containers. He was a lanky man in his late 30s, wearing clothes that might have been green once but had faded to a color best described as dirt brown. His face had the weathered look of someone who spent more time outdoors than in, with smile lines around his eyes, and a beard that had given up on uniformity. He carried a simple recurve bow, a knife his grandfather had given him, and a pack containing rope, some hooks and a thermos of coffee that was somehow still hot. Marcus had come to Verdant 9 because the Cooperation Commission was paying obscenely well and did not ask many questions. Teaching scientists how to identify edible plants and build emergency shelters was easy money, and they left him alone the rest of the time. He had a cabin, access to pristine wilderness, and enough solitude to finally finish the book he had been writing about primitive survival techniques. It was possibly the best job he had ever had. When the 3 alien officers had arrived at the research outpost yesterday, Marcus had been in the common area fixing a broken table. He had watched them swagger in with their weapons and armor, demanding access to the wilderness zone for training purposes. The station commander had nervously agreed, mentioning something about a human survival instructor being somewhere in the forest. The aliens had dismissed this information with the kind of casual arrogance that suggested they had never been humbled by nature. Marcus had said nothing, simply filed away the information that 3 heavily armed aliens would be crashing around his forest, and made plans to check his trap lines early. Now, watching Vexthor march into the underbrush with his quantum rifle held high, Marcus allowed himself a small grin. This was going to be better than the time he had watched a bear chase a group of corporate executives during that team-building retreat in Montana. He settled in to observe, sipping his coffee. He had nowhere else to be, and this promised to be educational. Commander Vexthor's hunting expedition began with confidence and ended with him dangling upside down from a tree, his quantum rifle 3 meters below him in a stream, and his dignity somewhere in orbit. The first hour had gone reasonably well by his standards. He had tracked something large through the forest, following broken branches and disturbed soil, with the intensity of someone who had read extensively about tracking but never actually done it. His armor's environmental sensors kept pinging with alerts about atmospheric moisture, pollen counts, and optimal breathing rates, which he ignored because they were clearly malfunctioning. One moment Vexthor was walking confidently through the forest. The next moment his left leg was yanked upward with enough force to lift his entire body off the ground. His weapons clattered to the earth as he flailed, trying to understand how physics had suddenly betrayed him. The sapling whipped him into the air, where he hung suspended like some kind of disgraced ornament, his armor creaking ominously. From the ground below, his translator picked up a sound his rifle had helpfully identified as human laughter. Marcus emerged from behind a large oak, looking up at the dangling alien with undisguised amusement. "Morning. Nice day for a walk, huh?" Vexthor attempted to right himself, which only resulted in more spinning. "Human, assist me down from this device immediately." "Device? Oh, you mean the snare." Marcus scratched his beard thoughtfully. "See, the thing is, I set that for a deer. You are significantly heavier than a deer. I am genuinely impressed the sapling held. This is a violation of training protocols. Release me at once." Marcus pulled out a knife and began walking toward the rope. Sure. Fair warning though, you are going to fall directly into that stream. Your rifle is already in there, by the way. Saw it go in a few minutes ago. That water is maybe 4 feet deep, so you will survive, but your pride is going to need medical attention. He cut the rope. Vexthor's splash could be heard from approximately 200 meters away. When he emerged, dripping and covered in aquatic vegetation, Marcus was sitting on a log, still grinning. "So," the human said conversationally, "you folks are hunting for dinner, right? How is that working out for you?" Lieutenant Krell, Nak was having what her species called a recursive logic failure, which translated roughly to getting absolutely nowhere despite doing everything correctly. Her sensor array had detected 47 different animals within her designated hunting zone. She had tracked them with precision, calculated their movement patterns, predicted their behavior based on comparative biology databases, and created detailed tactical approaches for each potential target. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The problem was that every single animal saw her coming from approximately 500 meters away and left the area at speed. This should not have been possible. Her stealth systems were military-grade, capable of masking her thermal signature, dampening sound, and even adjusting her visual profile to blend with the environment. She was practically invisible by any measurable standard. Unfortunately, she had forgotten that visibility and silence were not the same as understanding how to move through a forest. She had stepped on 17 dry branches, walked through a patch of particularly aromatic plants that caused every animal within a kilometer to flee, and accidentally disturbed a nest of insects that were now following her in an angry cloud. Krelnik checked her tactical display again. The nearest viable target was a large herbivore, approximately 300 meters north. She adjusted her approach vector, compensated for wind direction, and began her careful advance. 2 steps later, she walked directly into a net that materialized out of the foliage like some kind of botanical ambush. The weighted edges wrapped around her sensor array, covering her optical receptors and tangling her limbs. She fell backward with a crash that sent several birds fleeing from nearby trees. From somewhere behind her, she heard that same human laughter she had picked up on the comm frequency earlier. "You know," Marcus said, walking into her limited field of view, "that net was meant for catching fish in the stream. I hung it there to dry. You might be the first person to get caught by laundry." Krelnik struggled against the netting, her translator producing a series of frustrated clicks. "This is unacceptable. Your primitive equipment is interfering with official military operations." Primitive equipment that caught a fancy alien with 17 different kinds of sensors. Marcus began untangling the net with practiced ease. "Maybe those sensors need a firmware update. Or maybe you need to try using your actual sensors instead of letting computers do everything. I am using optimal hunting strategies based on centuries of Zenthari tactical development." Right. And how many animals have you caught so far? The silence was answer enough. Marcus freed her from the net and coiled it over his shoulder. Tell you what, sun is going to set in about 6 hours. Why don't you and your friends meet me back at the big clearing where you started? I will have dinner ready. You expect us to abandon our mission and accept your charity? Nope. I expect you to keep failing for another few hours, then show up hungry and pretending it was your idea all along. He started walking away, then paused. Oh, and watch out for the ravine about 100 meters that way. It has got a nasty drop, and I only know about it because I fell in it myself 2 months ago. Krelnik watched him disappear into the trees, her sensor array tracking his heat signature until he moved out of range. She stood in silence for exactly 30 seconds, running probability calculations. Then she carefully changed direction, avoiding the ravine. Flight Officer Drentok had found what his species considered the perfect solution to hunting. If you cannot find the prey, make the prey come to you. He had set up position on a rocky outcrop, assembled his portable artillery piece, and begun firing explosive rounds into the forest below. His logic was flawless. The explosions would either kill something he could collect, or frighten animals toward his position where he could shoot them with more conventional weapons. Either way he would have meat. What he had not calculated was that explosions in a forest caused fires, and fires spread quickly through dry underbrush, and those fires eventually surrounded the rocky outcrop on 3 sides. Drentok stood in the center of his increasingly warm perch, watching flames advance with the dawning realization that his military career might be ending in the stupidest way possible. His scales provided some heat resistance, but not enough to walk through fire. His comm unit had melted 15 minutes ago when he had set it down too close to a burning log. His artillery piece was out of ammunition because he had used all of it creating this situation. He was contemplating the dignity of simply standing there and accepting his fate when a rope landed next to him, dropping from the trees above. Marcus rappelled down beside him, smoke-stained but grinning. You know, most people try to avoid setting the forest on fire. You went the other direction. I respect the commitment. Drentok's translator struggled with his dialect. Drentok make mistake. Yeah, buddy. You really did. Marcus gestured to the rope. Can you climb? Drentok can climb. Great. Go up. Head north along the branches. You will find a stream about 200 meters that way. The fire will not cross water. I will be right behind you. They climbed in silence, moving through the canopy as smoke billowed below. When they finally reached the stream and safety, Drentok sat heavily on the bank, watching his artillery piece disappear into the flames. Marcus dropped down beside him, checking the rope for damage. So, hunting going well, Drentok managed something that might have been a laugh. Human make joke. Human funny. Human funny because you set my forest on fire. Marcus stood, brushing ash from his clothes. Lucky for you, there is a fire break about half a kilometer east. The flames will burn out when they hit it. Probably, assuming the wind does not shift. Human angry. Honestly, I am more impressed than angry. That takes talent. He offered a hand to help Drentok up. Come on. I need to check my traps before everything in the forest relocates to a different continent. Marcus moved through his trap line with the efficiency of long practice, checking each location and resetting the snares that had been triggered. 2 rabbits, one that looked like a turkey but had 6 legs, and something that resembled a boar if boars had tusks and an attitude problem. It was a good haul, better than he had expected, given the chaos the aliens had caused. He field-dressed the game quickly, working with the kind of unconscious skill that came from years of practice. His grandfather had taught him to hunt in the mountains of Colorado, back before the old man's arthritis made climbing impossible. Those lessons had stuck with him through marine training, through college, through every job and relationship and cross-country move that had defined his adult life. There was something meditative about the work. No computers, no interfaces, no tactical displays, just hands, knife, and knowledge passed down through generations. The aliens, with all their technology, were trying to solve hunting like it was an engineering problem. They had forgotten that humans had been doing this since before they figured out agriculture, back when survival meant understanding animals better than you understood yourself. By the time the sun started its descent toward the horizon, Marcus had cleaned his game, built a smoking rack from green wood, and started a fire that would have made his grandfather proud. The meat went into the smokehouse, a temporary structure he assembled from branches and bark in about 20 minutes. Smoking meat was an art form, requiring the right wood, the right temperature, and enough patience to not rush the process. He had hauled everything back to the clearing where the aliens had started their hunt, setting up near the tree line where there was a good view of the sunset. The fire crackled pleasantly, smoke rising into the evening air. He rigged a spit for the boar creature, seasoning it with herbs he had gathered and salt from his pack. The rabbits went into a pot with some wild vegetables he had identified earlier, making a stew that filled the air with rich aromas. Marcus was checking the smoked meat when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. Multiple sets, moving with varying degrees of stealth. He smiled and added another log to the fire. The 3 alien officers emerged from the forest, looking significantly worse than they had that morning. Vexthor's armor was covered in mud and aquatic plants, one of his 4 arms hanging limply from what appeared to be a sprained shoulder. Krelnak's sensor array was partially crushed, several antennae bent at unfortunate angles, and she moved with the careful precision of someone trying to preserve remaining dignity. Drentok was mostly unharmed but smelled strongly of smoke and shame. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, staring at the scene before them. The humans sat by a cheerful fire, tending to meat that smoked over carefully arranged coals. More meat roasted on a spit, fat dripping into flames with satisfying sizzles. A pot bubbled with something that smelled unexpectedly delicious. Marcus looked up and waved. "Right on time. Hope you folks like smoked meat, because I have got plenty." Vexthor attempted to salvage some authority. "We did not request your assistance, human." "Nope, but you are going to accept it anyway, because you are hungry, tired, and your pride already died around noon." Marcus gestured to logs he had arranged near the fire. "Sit down. Food is almost ready." They hesitated for exactly 5 seconds before the smell of cooking meat overrode military discipline. Hunger was a universal language, apparently. Marcus served the food on flat pieces of bark, which was probably not up to military dining standards, but worked fine in the wilderness. The smoked meat had a rich, complex flavor from hours over the fire. The roasted boar thing was tender and seasoned perfectly. The stew was hearty and warming, filled with chunks of rabbit and vegetables that complemented each other beautifully. The aliens ate in silence, their earlier bravado completely absent. Marcus watched them with quiet amusement, tending the fire and occasionally turning the remaining meat on the spit. Finally, Krelnak spoke. "How did you catch all of this?" Marcus shrugged. "Snares, mostly. A couple of deadfall traps. One of them I just tracked and shot with my bow. Nothing fancy. We have superior technology. Superior training. We should have been more successful than you. Technology does not mean much if you do not understand what you are doing." Marcus poked at the fire with a stick. "Hunting is not about having the best equipment. It is about knowing the land, understanding animal behavior, and moving like you belong in the environment instead of fighting against it. Vexthor flexed his injured arm carefully. The Korvathi have hunted for thousands of cycles. On your homeworld, sure. But this is not your homeworld. Every ecosystem is different. Every forest has its own rhythm. Marcus pulled out some of the smoked meat for himself. You folks came in here with guns and sensors and tactical displays, trying to impose your will on the environment. The forest does not care about your technology. The animals definitely do not care. They just know you are loud, you smell wrong, and you are not part of their world. Drento clicked thoughtfully. Human teach hunting. I could, but I do not think your command would approve the methods. They involve a lot less shooting and a lot more sitting quietly in uncomfortable positions. Marcus grinned. Plus, you kind of set my forest on fire, so I am not feeling particularly charitable about lessons. The fire was contained. Drento protested weakly. The fire was lucky. There is a difference. They ate in silence for a while, watching the sun set through the trees. The forest around them had come alive with evening sounds, birds settling for the night, insects beginning their dusk chorus. It was peaceful in a way that military bases never were. Grennak eventually broke the silence. Your species is classified as technologically primitive by most galactic standards. Yep, we only figured out faster-than-light travel about 60 years ago. We are babies compared to most of you folks. Yet you succeeded where we failed, using methods that predate our earliest historical records. Marcus considered this. Technology is great. I love technology. I have a satellite phone in my cabin. I use GPS when I am scouting new areas, and I am not about to give up indoor plumbing. But technology should enhance what you can do, not replace basic skills. He gestured around the clearing. This, what we are doing right now. Humans have been doing this for maybe 200,000 years. Sitting around fires, cooking meat, telling stories. It is in our bones in a way that all your fancy training is not. Vexthor shifted uncomfortably on his log. This will reflect poorly in our mission reports. Could be worse. You could have actually starved. Marcus offered more stew. Besides, you learned something today. Maybe not what your command wanted you to learn, but something useful. What did we learn, human? That sometimes the old ways work because they work, not because they are traditional or primitive, or any other label you want to stick on them. Your ancestors probably knew how to hunt before they had technology. Mine definitely did. Somewhere along the line, your species forgot those skills and decided computers could do it better. He smiled. Computers are great at math. They are terrible at understanding why a deer is going to walk through this clearing at dusk, because the grass here is sweeter and the sight lines make them feel safe from predators. Quelan's antennae twitched. You predicted the deer would come here? Saw the tracks this morning, noticed the vegetation patterns, made an educated guess. Caught 2 of them before you folks even woke up. The 3 aliens exchanged glances that needed no translation. They had been thoroughly out-hunted by someone using technology their ancestors would have recognized. Marcus stood, stretching. I am going to check the smokehouse. You folks are welcome to stay by the fire as long as you want. There is more food if you are hungry. Just bank the coals when you leave, yeah? Fire safety is important, especially around idiots with artillery pieces. Drentok made a sound that might have been sheepish agreement. Later, after the aliens had left and Marcus was sitting alone by the dying fire, he allowed himself a satisfied smile. The forest was quiet again, peaceful. Tomorrow he would repair the snares Vexthor had destroyed, check the fire damage from Drentok's adventure, and maybe scout some new areas to the north. But tonight, he was content to sit and watch the stars emerge overhead, thinking about the absurdity of heavily armed aliens getting beaten by rope and patience. Somewhere in orbit, those three officers were probably trying to figure out how to write their reports without sounding completely incompetent. He hoped they learned something, but honestly, it did not matter much either way. Humans had been surviving in wilderness for longer than most alien species had been spacefaring. That knowledge was not going away just because someone invented quantum rifles and tactical sensors. If anything, the galaxy would probably benefit from remembering that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best ones. Marcus banked the fire, gathered his gear, and headed back toward his cabin. Behind him, smoke from the meat-smoking process still rose into the night air, carrying the smell of properly cooked game. It was the smell of success, earned not through overwhelming firepower or superior technology, but through understanding, patience, and skills that had been old when the pyramids were young. The galaxy had its empires and its weapons, and its grand civilizations spanning star systems. That was all very impressive, but none of them could make a proper fire or smoke meat worth a damn, and honestly, that said everything that needed to be said about the difference between advancement and wisdom.